Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For me and for us at the FMS Forum and the Faculty of Management Studies, this indeed is a very, very special evening. It's one of those rare events where three actors on the virtual stage we have today: a former Dean, Professor Neelamegham, my tutor, my lecturer, my guide while I was doing my MBA, who wrote the foreword, Dr. Lalit Johri, and Sunder Hemrajani, a former colleague, a friend, and now an author, are on the same axis. A very special welcome to each one of you. I realize there are friends from Slovenia, there are friends from the US, and from Philippines who joined in. A very special welcome to you. Thank you for joining us today. The chief guest for the evening is our former Dean of the Faculty of Management Studies, Dr. S. Neelamegham. In the next 4 to 5 minutes, I plan to give a brief introduction to each one of our panelists in a given sequence. And I need to spend possibly a minute or two more than I budgeted, because when I looked at the numbers of attendees, there are a significant number of attendees who are from outside the FMS community. Sundar, that shows the reach and your network of people who are looking forward to this very special evening. Dr. Neelamegham was the Dean of the Faculty of Management Studies and Professor of Marketing at the University of Delhi. He is also the co-founder of the Academy of Indian Marketing, along with Dr. Jagdish Seth of the United States. He is the Senior Advisor to the World Association of Small and Medium Enterprises. He is also the Honorary Director of Global Business and Marketing Association. Professor Neelamegham has held several key positions in the University of Delhi. Sorry. As the Dean of FMS, he is still vividly recollected for he was instrumental in diversifying the MBA program with a highly enriched curriculum way back in the 50s and 60s. He was educated at the University of Madras and Stanford in the United States. He received his doctoral degree in business administration from the University of Delhi. He was associated with the International Teachers Program of the Harvard Business School. Professor Neelamegham is known in most circles for his pioneering work on developing Indian case management studies. Dr. Neelamegham collaborated with Professor Andrew Toll, former Director of Case Development from the Harvard Business School. He has served as a visiting professor at several universities, including the United States, Canada, France, and Australia. He has chaired several committees at the pan-India level and at the global level, including professional bodies. He's been a consultant to the Asian Development Bank and several other global agencies. His book, Marketing in India, Text and Cases, is even today widely referred to by students of management in premier business schools. He's a recipient of several awards for his contribution to management and for his distinguished services over several decades to the field of management education. Good evening, Dr. Neelamegham. Welcome to this very, very special book launch, Beyond the Mountains, by none else than a student of yours, whose guide was a young colleague of yours. I would request you to first share with us your opening remarks, and possibly I have one question for you after your opening remarks. Over to Dr. Neelamegham.
Yeah. Mr. Parigi, it's a very great pleasure to participate in this function. You are a visionary, leader and organizer. I am very happy to see Lalit Johri, whom I am meeting after 20 years. I'm equally happy to meet the Dean of FMS and also Kamal Oberoi. And I congratulate Hemrajani because his interesting book, it's not only a story, but it is also intensely practical. And it will be very useful not only for the young students, but also the executives who have got the spirit of adventure in their heart. FMS, when you talk about it today, many business schools, they boast of many new teaching methods like action-oriented, experiential method, etc. You'll be happy to hear that FMS as a pioneer launched several innovative teaching programs right from its inception. It was in 1964 we published our book, Indian Cases in Management, even before the appearance of IIM Ahmedabad. We were also first to set up the behavioral science lab and offer sensitivity training program to all the executives. Right from the inception, our policy was to integrate theory and practice in our curriculum and courses. That is why when Johri approached me with a question of expedition, I was greatly excited. I applied for funds to the university, but the university said it's not possible to consider expedition as a teaching method, only as sports. So I said, yes, consider as sports. I want to improve the mental and physical well-being of my students. Then they gave me some funds which are totally inadequate. We have to raise additional resources. Now the question is, recently, the Graduate Management Council for Admissions, in their survey of recruiters, they identify 5 skills which they look for in MBA graduates: strategic thinking, crisis management, ability to work with others, that is leadership, communication with empathy and compassion, innovation, ability to navigate disruption in technology. Tell me, how do you impart these skills to the students? I'm reminded of Benjamin Franklin, who said, tell me, I forget. Teach me, I remember. Involve me, I learn. This involvement is very important. That is the key when you talk about this mountain expedition. You are forced to confront difficult situations and you have to overcome all the challenges. Overcoming challenges by a team results in learning, which you cannot get by reading books or listening to lectures or even by simulation exercises. It is a real-time learning. It is in real time when the students develop, demonstrate, practice managerial skills. These are all real life skills essential for daily working life. And so that is why we were very keen to start it as a pedagogic method. It is, Edmund Hillary once said, I will not take much time. Edwin Hillary said, it is not mountain we conquer, but ourselves. Because here, you have to learn how to live with hardships. You have to learn how to collaborate, how to communicate, how to gain confidence. More, I think Sunder Hemrajani will tell, because all these things are contained in his own book. And also one last thing I would like to say, ships are safe in harbor, but that is not the reason why ships are built. Because risk-taking and innovation and heart of management. How do you teach risk-making? That is what the expedition is meant for, because it helps you not only to take risks, but also more important, risk awareness. Risk awareness is equally important. Many business organizations fail because they're willing to take risks, but they're not aware. That is what is done. Let me conclude with a statement of Winston Churchill once said, success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is a courage to continue that matters. That is what we learned from these expeditions, the courage to continue, especially during the post-COVID period. This is what is important. If you got the courage to continue, failures and success do not matter. And that is what I learned. And I think there's a very interesting book which presents all these views, which will be of great value. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to give these remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Neelamegham. Thank you for your candid observation of the limitations of a business school's autonomy when it works on a university-based institutional framework. I just have one question for you, Dr. Neelamegham. What is that mental construct that gave you that leap of faith to push and say, yes, it's a sports activity, and took the leap of faith? Because it is obvious for those who understand and who are familiar with tricking, the risk levels are extremely high.
Risk-taking is very important, you see, because what you call, I will give you a very simple example. When I went to Badrinath, one person said, you should not climb up now, because tomorrow there is going to be storm, avalanches, etc. But it looked very bright. I was surprised, how come he says? But exactly as he said, the next day I could not move, I have to stay. This is what you call risk awareness. So the necessity to teach the students not only risk taking, but risk awareness. That is one of the important things which Dr. Johri and myself considered when you talk about this expedition. In fact, I told Dr. Johri, if he remembers, two things. One is you have to take the students and bring them back safely. Number two, you get all the resources prepared well, because strategy and execution, it's not only strategy, but you have to execute it. But then he did that, and that was followed by Hemrajani. That is what I will answer your question.
Thank you, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to this evening's book launch of Beyond the Mountains by Sunder Hemrajani. I now have the privilege to introduce Dean Professor Vivek Suneja. He's also the patron of the FMS Forum, and in his very, very inimitable style, he says, I'm a co-host of the evening. And Vivek, I know this embarrasses you, but I cannot but be honest to my executive council that I have really, really received unprecedented support from you. Not only encouragement and support, but constructive criticism during my tenure since I began in July last year. I'm indebted to you, sir, and that is why I am so happy that we can today call you a co-host. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Vivek Suneja is the head and dean of the Faculty of Management Studies and professor of strategy at the Faculty of Management Studies, University of Delhi. As a Felix Scholar, he studied for his doctoral program from the University of Reading in the United Kingdom. For over a decade, he taught at several premier universities in Britain, including the University of Salford, Manchester, and the Open University Business School in my favorite place and my home, Milton Keynes. Upon his return to India, he joined FMS as professor. He has served as Dean of Planning at the University of Delhi and also as Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of Delhi. Professor Suneja has published several books and papers in areas of strategy, in areas of entrepreneurship, in areas of economics, culture, and public policy. A huge spectrum, a great thought leader. Among his prominent books are Markets, a multi-dimensional approach to the market economy. There's yet another on policy issues for business, economics of marketing, Economic Theory and Policy Amidst Global Discontent is a recent publication. All these are being published by iconic leading publishing houses in the United Kingdom. Professor Suneja has done consulting, training for several prominent international and national organizations and firms. Welcome, Professor Suneja. We are conscious that you're deeply committed to furthering societal well-being whenever you have raised a question during our committee meetings. With this, I would request you, sir, to share your opening remarks and then possibly permit me to ask you one question. Over to Dean Suneja.
Thank you, Mr. Parigi, for that very warm welcome. Professor Neelamegham, our former dean, also the former dean of planning. I inherited his post many years after he demitted that post. Professor Lalit Johri, whom I have not had the privilege to meet, but thanks to technology, we're meeting today. Former faculty, also the founder of the FMS Trekking Club. And I'm going to request him to take up that post again. I think we need a trekking club again. And Professor Lalit Johri is going to help us do that. Of course, the star of today's show, Mr. Sunder Hemrajani. I also noticed in the participant list, we have two former deans listening in, and I'm grateful they're here, Professor Singla and also Professor Kurios Mamkutam. They're both watching, and thank you both for being here. A lot of faculty of FMS is here, and of course, students. So on behalf of FMS, I would like to thank everyone. First of all, the FMS Forum, all the members of the FMS Forum for bringing this together. But above all, Mr. Sunder Hemrajani for writing this wonderful book. So I've read this book over the last 3 days, and it's wonderful. I recommend it to everyone. It's a wonderful book. It has two parts. The first describes the trek itself, and the second is the life lessons one learns from a trek. And both parts are very, very instructive and very, very inspiring. When I read the book, and of course there'll be a discussion later on the book, so I don't want to give that away. But the first thought that came to my mind is that, do we look at life as a challenge or as a battle? I think that's the pivotal thing. Do we look at our careers, our education systems, our life in general? Do we look at it as a battlefield, in which case we have to fight everybody? There are ego wars, there's envy, there's domination, there's control, there's jockeying for power. A lot of that has happened throughout human history. Or do we look at it as a challenge? So the mountain, is it a battle? Is it a challenge? Challenge to our faculties of courage, of perseverance, good humor. Krishna often says, the world is a leela. It's a play. Now, if you want to play anything, whether you're playing badminton or tennis or squash or go climbing mountains, there's a basketball court in FMS at the moment. There's also a table tennis table. I wish we had a football ground. We don't have yet. But if you play anything, right, unless you play it seriously, if you play trivially, there's no fun. If you play badminton or tennis trivially, there's no fun. So to get the best out of a game, any sports, you have to test yourself, you have to persevere, you have to practice, you have to improve your skills, and then you try and beat your opponent, but not beat an opponent in an egoistic sense. It's just a game. When you start taking the game as a battle, then the game degenerates into a war. So we've had plenty of wars. We've had 2 world wars, which collectively killed 70 million people, because we forgot life is a game. It's a game of challenge, a game where we are tested for our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual strengths. And if we play it well, we enjoy, we have satisfaction, and we do it together. But if we look at it as a battle, the law of the jungle, then the world is a very dismal place. So I think mountaineering has much to teach us. That book is brilliant. It has a lot to teach us. I'm thankful to Mr. Sunder Hemrajani, he told me, when he first approached me about this book, he told me it was in the COVID time that he finally decided that the case studies he's been using in FMS regarding this trek, he will convert that into a book. So again, COVID was a challenge. Some people did rise to it. Mr. Hemrajani decided to write a book, which came out of COVID. So that's the whole point. So the last point I'd like to make is, 2 days ago in my morning walk, I saw a jogger and his t-shirt read, "Run easy, run easy." I also saw another chap with another t-shirt. It said, "I was feeling tired yesterday. I'm feeling tired today. I'm retired." So you can be retired at the age of 20. In fact, sometimes think some of the students are already retired. I don't see any zest in them, neither in the classroom nor outside. And you can be with zest like Mr. Neelamegham is, or Parigi Saab is, or Lalit and Sunder are at whatever ages. They're all young and hot. So it's all a question of mental age. So run easy and never retire. Never be tired. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Suneja. It's always a pleasure. And on behalf of the FMS Forum, I will once again extend a personal welcome this evening to our former deans. I do see their names flashing. It's indeed kind of you, sirs and madam, to be with us this evening. I'm now moving on to a person whom I've known as Lalit, and later as Dr. Lalit Johri, and later as my tutor. Well, I was doing my executive MBA in the 1970s at FMS. Dr. Lalit Johri is an academician and is a practitioner and is a man for all seasons. He spent over 45 years in the field of international business. Till October 2019, he served as a full-time senior fellow in international business and as a director at the Oxford Advanced Management and Leadership Program of the Said Business School, University of Oxford. He currently serves as an advisor to policymakers and thought leaders in several Asian and other non-Asian countries and governments, and of course, the multinationals and the medium enterprises. Prior to joining the University of Oxford, my friend Lalit served as professor of international business at Asian Institute of Technology, School of Management in Thailand, in Bangkok. He was also the founding director of the school's executive MBA program. He, of course, tenured in the University of Delhi. He was a professor at the Faculty of Management Studies for over 18 years. He has led research, consulting education programs of senior leaders in the private sector and the public sector across the globe, specifically in the United States and in the United Kingdom. Lalit is now a senior advisor, a man for all seasons who wears several hats, which he's reluctant that we introduce him this way, but I do insist. He's an advisor to the Southern Group, founder chairman of Transformation Paradigm. He's the chief knowledge officer in Oxford Knowledge Leadership Club and a founder member of the advisory board of the Institute of Public and Private Partnership, Hong Kong. Welcome, Lalit. It's 4 decades since we did connect. But in these days of public disclosure, I will have to tell this distinguished audience and our esteemed panelists that when I was interviewed for a position in the Oxford University, I was asked 2 questions. One, do you know Dr. Amartya Sen of the Delhi School of Economics? I said, who doesn't? And I did go to the Delhi School of Economics. And I thought the interview was over. They said, no, one last question. Are you from FMS? I said, yes. Do you know Dr. Lalit Johri? And possibly that was when the needle tilted in my favor to work in Oxford for 6 years on the Advisory Council of Side Business. So thank you for having been there for FMS, for me at Oxford. Thank you very much. Lalit, I would request you to share your opening remarks. Yes, but I do have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
Stage is yours. Spotlight on my friend Lalit Johri.
Thank you, Preetam. First of all, namaskar to all my colleagues and my teacher, Professor Neelamegham, and Dean Dr. Suneja, and the special people who constitute the community of the trackers, all the students, the alumni, and all the guests who are present today. It's such a delightful experience to be part of all of you today. And most importantly, I spent days after days doing 2 or 3 webinars, which are mostly very, very academic. This is such a welcome change because I'm looking at my own student, a gentleman, Sunder, who amongst thousands of books on leadership, I mean, it's difficult to estimate how many million articles have been published on leadership and how many thousand books, both the ones which are selling at the airports and the ones which are found in the libraries. Sunder has produced a highly credible book because it's based on his personal experiences. And this is what I call as the authentic text, which what I call as something that you can all trust. And when Sunder asked me that, Lalit, I would like you to write the foreword for this book, I was at a complete loss. What am I going to write? Once Sunder has already captured the very essence of the leadership as we experienced during various expeditions that were launched, both for me as well as for many of you outside the framework of FMS and within the framework of FMS. So thank you, Sunder, for writing such a lovely book. This is a great service to practically anybody or everybody who aspires to be a great leader. And you don't have to wait to be in a position to be a leader. You can be a leader in any role. You could be a leader at any age, as we have seen amongst the climate change activists, and you can be anywhere in the world. What you need is some very basic tools which you have provided. So I would like to applaud you for producing such a fantastic text on leadership. I just want to recall my days at Oxford University, at FMS. I mean, I had the twin benefit of being a student as well as a teacher. And one of the biggest thing that you do as a student is to find weaknesses in the system, because that's what a student is all about. So at that time, there was no course on leadership. In fact, the word leadership was not really known to my generation of students. What we had at that time were courses like organization behavior, interpersonal dynamics, and a little bit of industrial psychology was being taught. And also a lot of literature that was being used to run these courses, particularly the theories, were pretty westernized theories, and they really did not capture the reality and the essence of the life that we were living in India at that time. So a sense of observation that there is a gap here. We need to fill this gap in one way or the other. We took the courage of entering the dean's office. In 1976, you needed huge amount of courage to even stand outside the office of the dean of FMS, always a source of huge power. And but what was interesting was that Professor Neelamegham was a true friend of all the students. Whenever we went to his office, he welcomed us and he showed us a sort of a very wise path full of wisdom. And what I liked about him was that as soon as we presented the idea to him, he did all the mental calculations and responded by saying, yes, we are on. We are going to do it because this is something which is going to help. And then I think the rest of the story, Professor Neelamegham himself shared with you. I will share with you one or two funnier aspects of my experience. Once the decision moved downwards, we had many interesting situations to deal with. We used to have a series of admin staff. They were all nice people. They were very, very supportive. But one of them said that, look, this is a very dangerous activity, and he might have read somewhere that a lot of people die on mountains and treks. He said that, look, you need to bring an undertaking from your parents. He asked all the trekkers that please bring an undertaking from your parents that if something happens to you and your life, the university will not be responsible for it. So I asked him that, why do you want this undertaking from the parents? Because we are all above 18 years. He said, no, you have to be responsible to your families, and therefore you need an undertaking signed by your parents. And now we all know what happens when we have to meet such expectations of the system. Within 24 hours, everybody had an undertaking signed by the parents, and you know who signed those undertakings. So I'm not suggesting that you have to undertake this kind of enterprising entrepreneurial behavior as part of your leadership approach. But what I'm suggesting here is that often you have to find some very creative solution as long as they don't harm anybody in order to overcome the sense of bureaucracy. There were lots of stories. I think as we go into Q&A, I will share with all of you. And one very important thing that I want to share with all of you is that life is short. Don't get consumed by the Indian television or the politics or the stock exchange or whatever you have. Go out, see the real world, and challenge all the received wisdom. Try to collect your own sense of experience. After all, you are now living in a world where sense making is the most important skill, I would say. And what trekking and mountaineering teaches you is the art of sense making. You have to sense the weather, you have to sense the health and the well-being of your colleagues, you have to sense how much stress you can bear in a day. So raise your bottoms and sling a bag on your shoulder, fill it up with some water and medicines and cookies and whatever you have. Get hold of a map if you want, and go to some of the remotest places on earth, and that's where all the learning of the life, and that's exactly what my good friend Sunder has captured so beautifully well. So Preetam, that's how I would like to start.
Lalit, thank you for your introductory and opening remarks. Lalit, I cannot but ask you a couple of questions, and maybe I may request you to read any excerpt, but let me first start with my questions.
Yes.
They're short, and it's for you to fill them. I was absolutely impressed when I read your foreword to the book, not once, but twice. Tell me, I think you are ahead of your time, or was it an accident that you come up with a concept called creating a leadership simulator, which you have intellectually confessed was somewhere as a benchmark inspired by the aviation industry?
Absolutely.
So why don't you share with us and the audience? What was
So,
the construct? Was
yeah.
it जो हिंदी में कहते हैं धोखाबाजी, or what is it? I'm sure there was much more to it when you kept pushing it forward, the concept.
Absolutely. So I think it was sometime in 1973 or 74, the US embassy in Delhi used to organize some very special exhibitions where they would demonstrate the work that was being NASA in. And during one of those exhibitions in Delhi, they had actually brought a simulator, a space simulator in which you could sit and enjoy a journey into the outer space. So I was there. I was still single at that time. So I had all the time in my word, and that's how I should say, investing all my time and going to different exhibitions in Delhi. And when I went into the simulator, and the whole journey was about 90 seconds. And when I came out of it, I suddenly realized that what the hell, these guys have made me go into the space. And that is how this idea was triggered.
Okay. No, I think you're well ahead of your time. And one last question. What is the rationale, if someone were to ask you in brief, for trekking expeditions? What is the rationale?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I will again share with you a very interesting story. I was once asked that, why would you want to take so much risk? Why would you like to? Because the chances of failure are very high. Because I don't know, for some strange reason, when I was growing, most people used to associate trekking and mountaineering with loss of life, or whatever you want to call it. So this gentleman who was talking to me, and I don't know whether it was one of the interview situations or what. So he said the chances of failure are very high, and why do you want to take it? I said precisely for the reason that the chances of failure are high. He said, no, but everybody wants to do things where they can succeed. I said, look, it is equally important to learn lessons from your failures. And I would imagine that some of my best lessons, which later on I have been able to frame in the form of concepts, which I've been teaching both at FMS and Oxford and in other academic institutions where I have taught, were a blend of a lot of reading of the literature, a lot of received wisdom, which I got from my teachers, and of course, my personal experiences. So I would say you don't gain unless you fail. And you don't learn anything unless you fail. And it is always a good idea to think in terms of shaking hands with the risk, as long as you prepare very well to shake hands with the risk.
Thank you, Lalit. I think that gives me a great segue about taking risks. And let me tell you how delighted I am, because Sunder Hemrajani was a former colleague of mine, a good friend, and now an author. I've known him at very close quarters while he built one of India's largest sectorial companies for the Times of India as managing director of Times of Out of Home Media. But before I introduce him formally, I would say that in my career of several decades, if I have known one gentleman CEO with great dignity and restraint, Lalit,
Yeah.
during crisis, during the year 2008, when I had to cut salaries after the financial meltdown in many companies, and we had to lay off, we had to give up several things that we took for granted. Here is Sunder, who navigated that enterprise for me, and I get much more credit today, which actually is owed to Sundar's managing directorship and leadership of Times Out of Home. Thank you, Sundar. For those of you who know Sundar, I have to but give a formal introduction. He has 35 years of experience in sales, marketing, and general management functions in leading companies like Hindustan Lever, PepsiCo, Times of India, Whirlpool. He's currently the co-founder and CEO of Incon Strategy Advisors Private Limited. Sundar is an alumnus of the Harvard Business School. He did his MBA from the Faculty of Management Studies in '79 and graduated with distinction in mechanical engineering from the Delhi College of Engineering in 1977 and is a high visibility, great contributor to the modern school where he completed his education in 1972. Sundar was a member of the FMS trekking expedition to Margan Pass, scaling a height of 13,000 feet. And then he led the expedition, number 3, the third expedition, to Sach Pass and to scale 15,000 feet with both first year and second year full-time MBA students from FMS. He's been a guest faculty at FMS for several years, teaching marketing as a subject to full-time students. Sundar, we are indeed proud of you. And I think personally, and everyone here on the program will agree, it's been a great service, a book which is affordable, accessible, digestible is an English word in Indian English called digestible, and can be good lessons. Sundar, I have far more questions for you than I had for my friend Lalit. So you have to be patient. Your time starts now. Sunder Hemrajani, author of Beyond the Mountains, Overcoming Challenges Within, 10 Lessons for Leading in Crisis. Sundar, in the book you mention about your love for the mountains. When they did start?
Well, good evening, sirs. It's an honor to share the screen with my gurus and my mentors. I mean, this is really an honor, and I'm grateful to all of you for being here. I'm grateful to all the participants, my friends, my colleagues, and in fact, I just saw that Dr. Narag has also joined, and we have some very fond memories of FMS, and he's reignited those memories. In my opening remarks, sir, before I answer your question, I would like to say that, and I think Lalit mentioned it, I learned my lessons in leadership and teamwork outside the classroom, on the playing fields, as a member of the all-conquering FMS football team. We used to have a multinational team represented by 9 nationalities, and we did extremely well. And the manager of the team was Dr. Narag, who's also joined this session, and a part of the cheering squad was, in fact, Lalit was a part of the cheering squad. So we had a wonderful time. And I think, as I said, leadership was not a subject which was taught in the classroom those days. I attended various leadership sessions in companies I worked with, Hindustan Lever, PepsiCo, Whirlpool, etc. But it was something which we learned on the playing field and the trekking expeditions. So much of what I'm going to talk about today is about the trekking expedition. And love for the mountains. I remember going to Simla with my family when I was just about 9 years old. My uncle was based there, and I think it all comes from my father, who was very fond of walking. And I think when I was in Simla, we walked lower Simla, upper Simla. I think whole day we were walking. But the ultimate, I think the momentum came when I went on a school trip to Nainital when I was 11 years old. And we again walked all the time. I remember trekking along with my classmates to a place which was known as China Peak. Today it's called Naini Peak, which is the highest point in Nainital. It was a 6 to 7 kilometer one way, so it was about 12 to 14 kilometers both ways. And it was 8,500 feet. And I remember I enjoyed that trek. And once I think I fell in love with the mountains, then there were various other trips in modern school. I went to Dalhousie, where we trekked from Dalhousie to Khajiar and from Khajiar to Chamba, and a trek of close to about 30 odd kilometers. And then to Kullu Manali and to Bhuali and Palampur. I think every year we used to go. And I actually fell in love because I think the scenic beauty was really mesmerizing. And for me, at some stage, it became you can call it a spiritual experience. Mm-hmm. And so when this opportunity happened, I just signed up for it immediately without even consulting my family. I mean, getting the letter signed and all happened much later. And but it was something which I enjoyed doing, and I sort of off and on subsequently also have been going to the mountains, but haven't done any professional trek.
But tell me, Sundar, it's a simple question, but the second part isn't. When did you think of writing a book? That's a chronology, but why, Sundar? Why this book?
Sir, it actually, after I went on an expedition 2, I wrote what you call a funny article, in the FMS newsletter. That's the only thing I did. A part of that, I have customized it in the book. I mean, where we had a situation where an engineer, Krishnan, he was a medicine man on the trek. So he was dispensing medicine. So an engineer dispensing medicine, and we had, folks here. We have Kamal Oberoi, making puris. Yeah. And we had Chandrasekhar, who was darning the clothes. It was just an amazing experience. So I wrote an article, and then I got busy with my, what you call professional pursuits, with my professional goals. And I then decided, I think sometime in early, I think 2003 or 2004, to write a case study, because I realized that the trekking had come to a grinding halt after Lalit left FMS. So we had subsequently quite a few treks. I mean, it carried on because Vibha Rishi, who I worked with, she had been on a couple of treks, and she was the first woman to be on a trek. And so we it carried on till Lalit was around, and subsequently came to a grinding halt. So I said, let me go back to FMS. And I used to go there regularly because I was one of the recruiters, with Levers, Pepsi, Whirlpool, who used to go and recruit from FMS. And I got to know this trekking had stopped. So I wrote a case study, and I went back and conducted workshops. I think I conducted over 6-7 years, about 4 workshops with the students, trying to encourage them to, start all over again. But there were several issues, the October period, the first 10 days of October, which were normally reserved for trekking. So that's the best time to go out and trek, was now occupied by summer internship, summer placement, which used to happen. So it became a bit of a challenge. And in 2018 sometime, I met a friend and I was discussing this with him, and he said, Sunder, if you have a case study already, why don't you, go ahead and write a book? And what I would suggest you do is that, please, record your interface with the students when you are doing a workshop. You'll get very good insights from there. So that's what I did in 2018 and 19. And 2020 came the lockdown. Nothing much to do at home. So I said, why not? And the other part, which I also must acknowledge, is that there were a series of webinars conducted by Harvard Business School, which I attended, which was basically on leading in crisis. That was a subject. And I attended close to, I think, 8 or 10 webinars. And I said, this now looks good. So there's a lot of meaty stuff. And for me, writing a book, I've written a lot of articles. It doesn't come easy. And so honestly, I mean, that's how I did it. And Lalit was a great help, because he not only went through my drafts and I think gave me some very, very valuable inputs.
But tell me, why this unusual title, if I may be permitted to ask? Beyond the mountains, overcoming with the challenges within. What does it mean, Sunder? Can you sort of share your views on it?
Yeah, sure. In fact, when I wrote the case study, the title of the case study was Expedition 3, Overcoming the Challenges Within. And this was in 2003. See, when you are on a trekking or a mountaineering expedition, there are many challenges which you face. There are physical challenges, there are mental challenges. And the overall environment is very uncertain when you are there. Anything can go wrong. I mean, the weather can change, somebody can fall sick, etc. So, and I think the leader can suffer, in that uncertain environment, can suffer anxiety. There can be moments of self-doubt. There can be fear of failure, fear of others' judgments, and maybe lack of focus. Now, to my mind, these are challenges which are very internal to a person. And I think, and it's tougher to overcome these challenges. So that's how I sort of decided to call it, it was FMS Expedition 3 originally. Now I called it Beyond the Mountains, because it's beyond the mountaineering and trekking. It is overcoming the challenges within yourself.
Sunder, but for time constraint, I would have asked you to tell us about each of the 10 lessons. But if you were to pick one of the 10 life lessons, which one would that be and why?
That, Mr. Parigi, is a difficult question, but let me sort of try and attempt that. In fact, if you look at the current context,
yes,
there's so much distress. I can tell you, I've never seen so much distress in my life. I mean, there have been problems in the past. There have been crises in the past. I mean, there was a SARS crisis in the Southeast Asia. There was Ebola in Africa, and various bird flu somewhere. Then there was a famous financial crisis, which you referred to in 2008, 2009, which we had to navigate. But this crisis is different. It's truly global. The entire world is in it at the same time. And not just the medical dimension of this crisis. It is the economic dimension. It is the financial dimension. the social dimension, the psychological dimension. There are various dimensions in these crises. So coming to the point, and the fact of the matter is the poor and marginalized have got impacted much more than others. I mean, the level of inequality has gone up. I think there's enough data to suggest that. And to that extent, if I have to select one out of these 10,
Yes.
it will be the one on empathy, which says that empathy is an important virtue. Empathy is your ability to imagine what the other person is feeling. And I think that's something which you need more and more today. I think you have to be empathetic. And the second reason, which I must be honest in my response, was that if there's one failing which I had as a leader on Expedition 3, this was it. You know, the first 3 days of Expedition 3 were very tough. You know, they were really tough. I mean, you had a very difficult situation, and there were people who were on the trek for the first time. They were complaining about aches, about pains, and about blisters and all that. And I mean, the day one, I mean, you can imagine, I mean, we were going 1,000 feet up and 1,000 feet down. The distance wasn't very much, about 10 kilometers. But so there were people who were complaining. And I was sort of in my own world. You know, I was sort of, you can call it immersed in my own world, doing what we call task management. You know, we have to do this, now we have to make lunch for tomorrow, now we have to make tea, beverage, all that stuff. So the entire balance was on task. And to that extent, the emotional side of leadership was ignored. And the buzz was all there. And, you know, when somebody said, you know, that I'm suffering from ache and pain, and the medicine man, Krishnan, would just, you know, give medicine and vitamins and stuff like that. But I think there was a part which I missed. And that, to my mind, led to that situation in Dharwas, you know, where some of the people wanted to actually come back. I think I should have corrected the balance, because leaders have to listen to their team. You know, and empathy is what I call a priceless virtue. And absence of empathy for individual members can lead to tragic consequences. And I think the history of mountaineering is replete with so many examples. You know, you leave your colleague to die on the height, and you just go chasing, you know, your success. There's so many examples like that. And I think that's what my failing was, and that's why I've selected that, because I feel this is something which I need to share with the students and young executives, you know, today, because I think that's what we will need more and more going forward. So I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, you have, and you got me thinking, but I can't let you off. Can you read for me and for the audience and the panelist an excerpt, hopefully one or two, if time permits, at least one from your book?
Okay, let me sort of pick up a few. It'll take about 3 to 4 minutes.
Okay.
And I've taken excerpts from various places. And this is from Life Lesson 2, Take Appropriate. And we discussed well-reasoned risks earlier on. I think Dr. Neelamegham referred to it, Dr. Suneja and Lalit, I think all of them referred to this.
Yes.
And let me start with a quote from Nelson Mandela. Quote, I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Unquote. Let me read a paragraph. Leaders are pioneers, people who are willing to step out into the unknown. There are people who are willing to take risks. They're likely to make mistakes going down the path not trodden before. They will encounter some failures along the way. You should be brave enough to fail as a leader. Many important lessons are learned from failures. Leaders are learners. They learn from their mistakes and their successes. So that was the first reading. And quickly, I'll go on to the last lesson, or what I would call it, the big lessons for life. So there are 10 lessons. You know, when I was arriving at lessons, I arrived at some 15 or 17 lessons. So I had to cut them short. So I said, okay, let me now make big lessons for life. And I start with a quote, Edmund Hillary. Life's a bit like mountaineering. Never look down. And I'll spend a few minutes on this concept called the Stockdale Paradox. The leader must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with a discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be. Witnessing this philosophy of duality, author Jim Collins went on to describe it as Stockdale Paradox. I don't want to read the whole thing, but I'll come to the ultimate, what the Stockdale Paradox is. Quote, the most effective leaders in crisis are brutally honest about the situations, basically facts. They offer a rational basis for optimism, which is hope, and an emotional understanding for their teams, which is empathy. Needless to say, honesty and candor promotes trust and reason optimism about the future. Candor promotes trust, and the reason optimism about the future gives confidence and hope. Very quickly, unquote. In 2020, the world has undergone massive transformation due to COVID crisis. Unlike the financial crisis in 2008-9, this crisis has multiple dimensions. There are humanitarian and economic dimensions apart from the medical dimension. It has hit most countries and most industries simultaneously. This has pushed leaders and organizations beyond existing capabilities, resources, and knowledge. This calls for resilient leadership. This crisis also gives opportunities to the emerging young leaders to think out of the box. In developing economies like India, the poor and marginalized have suffered disproportionately. Empathy is a priceless virtue in this situation. This is a mantra that the younger generation needs to imbibe if they aspire to lead in the future. And finally, it's a personal thing. I have been through various ups and downs in my career. The biggest lesson for life learned through my experiences has been, quote, during the journey of life, when you encounter troughs and peaks, it is important to demonstrate reasoned optimism and courage during troughs and moderation and humility at peaks. The behavior during troughs determines how fast you come out of it. So that's
Thank you very much. I think that's been very insightful. You've been generous with sharing your perspectives and inner thinking. Sunder, we have quite a few questions. We'll try and pick a few. And before I go on to the question and answer, ladies and gentlemen, I once again thank you for investing time on a Saturday evening. Particularly a very special welcome to all our former deans and all members of the alumni who made this evening possible. Sundar's book is now on sale on e-portals like Amazon and Flipkart. He has deliberately priced it at a very comfortable affordability index of 250. And when I told him he had underpriced, he said, no, the idea is for any student, particularly executives who are just going into industry or any enterprise, to access it, buy it, and read it. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'll now tell the admin that I'm going to start with question number 1. This is a question, Sunder Hemrajani from Vedang Sharma. Starbucks ex-CEO and chairman Howard Schultz had said that one of the most undervalued characteristics of leadership is vulnerability and asking for help. How can a leader, when it's the right time, ask someone, can he or she overcome the inner challenges of their ego that prevents from asking for help? Sundar?
Well, you do encounter situations where you actually ask for help. And I think, we encountered it in both the expeditions. And I think the important thing is that egos can lead to disasters. And I think it's important that the people who are on the team understand that. And for a leader to ask help is something which is, especially in crisis. See, crisis is critical to get the whole team together, and and Lalit also experienced it, in the earlier expedition. And I think you have to leave your ego at home, because it's a collective team work, which is more important. And I would say that our successes, both in 2 and 3, I think it's a team which made a difference. And I think the credit goes to the team because they all stepped in. I mean, I mentioned earlier, engineer dispensing medicine. We had allocated the work, engineer doing darning. I mean, one can argue, okay, what is he doing? I mean, he'll say that, hey, this is not what I'm meant for. So I think it's important for everybody, all members of the team, including the leader, because if you read mountaineering, the history of mountaineering, there have been so many tragedies because of ego. So you have to leave your ego at home.
Right. Here is the second question, Sundar. What teachings did you get from the challenges you learned in trekking expeditions, in brief?
Well, teaching, I mean, it's all there in the book. And I would say that clearly teamwork, I have put it in the book, in the chemistry of individuals. And I think collectively, it acts as a multiplier. So, I mean, it's all there in the book. And there are several of them. And I just mentioned one. And I spoke about empathy earlier. And so there are several teachings which this thing.
That question came to you from Seti. Now I'm going on to the third question in the interest of time. Did you ever think of becoming a professional mountaineer, Mr. Hemrajani? What was your ambition? This question is from Smriti Singh.
Well, to be honest, no. And I must explain this. See, we've all had a very typical middle-class upbringing. So when I was doing my engineering and subsequently MBA, the priority really was financial security. And to that extent, I never thought, because mountaineering was not a paying profession, I said to myself that, see, my family's raised me. So I can do mountaineering as a hobby, but I can't become a professional mountaineer. And let me also explain, in fact, after Sach Pass, I said to myself, and we did that in 1978, that I must climb at least one peak above 15,000 feet, at least one. So I actually did a rock climbing course organized by Delhi Mountaineering Association. And I went and enrolled myself in a basic mountaineering course at Darjeeling, the Himalayan Mountaineering Institute at Darjeeling. Now, during the course, after finishing rock climbing and mountain running and all that and classroom teaching, I felt sick because I suddenly realized I was allergic to house dust. And the dorm where we were sleeping had a layer of dust. So every evening, I was on medication. So I couldn't do the snow climbing bit. So that was, to my mind, a bit of a setback. And but I want to tell you that is still a part of my bucket list. But now I have to convince my family because they don't think I'm fit enough to climb a peak above 15,000 feet. But it still remains a part of my bucket list.
Question number 4, Mr. Hemrajani. The question number 4 comes from Rasa Batula Srinivas. The responsibility of leaders towards the environment is often talked about in business schools. Can activities like trekking increase the leader's responsibility towards the environment? A brief answer, please.
Yes, it does. I mean, you hear of situations where, they are now cleaning up the entire Mount Everest, route for many years. And it is all cluttered and, they leave garbage behind. And I can tell you, I mean, when we were on this trek, I mean, we were quite conscious of this. And we were beneficiaries because we drank water from the streams. And we made sure that no garbage was left behind. And the good thing was that we stayed in places like the inspection bungalows and forest rest houses, which had arrangement to keep the stuff, which could be cleared by the caretakers later. So absolutely a great question. I think if the environment is not taken care of, I think we won't have these mountains, and we are seeing the consequences, in the recent accidents which happened in Uttaranchal. I think environment is really the key priority, not just in trekking and mountaineering, but I would say even otherwise.
The next question is from Shashi Kalatil. Good question, I think. The skills and perspectives required while climbing mountains are very different. For example, the descent at multiple levels. Any comment?
No, can you repeat that question? I did hear the second part.
The skills and perspectives required for a trekker or a leader who's trekking while climbing the mountains are very different than we normally are familiar with, right? Particularly if you look at the descent while coming down, okay? At multiple levels, there's a descent and then again, there's a climb. Any comments on this part of it?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, I mean, if you are really climbing a mountain, you do need different skill sets. And as I mentioned, I went for these rock climbing programs just to learn those skill sets. When you climb and then you rappel down and, so you need to have that skill set with you when you go to the mountains, for sure. And they're different in a way from trekking, because trekking, you're not really climbing the rocks, as they normally do with ropes and stuff like that, and rappelling down. It is basically going on those mule tracks, which is also quite tough. So yes, I agree with that. And I think for people who want to go for mountaineering, they must go through not only rock climbing, but snow climbing and all the skills you need, and crevasse rescue. Crevasse rescue is an important part when you're actually walking on glaciers and when you're climbing, on snow. So it's something which I think he's right. Shashi is a good friend from Lever Days, and I think it's a great question.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We will wrap up in the next 6, 7, 9 minutes. And here is question number 6 from Sridhar Bapat. During the expedition, did you at any stage feel that you will fail?
Oh, that's a trick question, Mr. Parigi. It's what I would call a trick question. Well, to answer that question, I'll just take 30 seconds. You need to define success. Before I come to failure, I think, how do you define success on a mountaineering, on a trekking expedition? And I think there was reference to this earlier. In a mountaineering expedition, one person reaches the peak while 9 other members support him, it's called a success. Yeah, one person reached the peak because that was the destination. In trekking, I can tell you, if those 3 or 4 people who wanted to come back from Dharwas and not go ahead, if they would have come back, would I have called it a success? Even the rest of the team would have gone. It would have been I would say, a part success. Yeah. Let me tell you, now this is with the benefit of hindsight. Our objective, as rightly pointed out at the beginning of this session, was that all 12 people will leave. We'll cross Sach Pass, which was our destination. And if we came back hale and hearty, without any serious injury, the minor injuries are quite possible, I would call it a success. So that's why I call it a success. But if half the team would have come back, or somebody would have been grossly injured, or they would have been a casualty, I would have called it a failure. So yes, in Dharwas, for the first time, coming back to your question, I got a sense that we might fail. It's just that when I was talking to those 2 groups of people, one of the groups was very clear they wanted to move ahead. The other group wanted to come back. And I think it was partly related to my lack of empathy for people who were suffering from aches and pains. So it was a solution which I had to find. But once we crossed Dharwas, I thought through. In fact, from Dharwas to Kilar, when I was walking, I was silent. And I was looking at the mistakes I had made. And I said it had to be different. And when we reached Kilar, I can tell you, we had a hurrah from the team which was outside. And they saw all of us coming there, and we had a evening of fun and frolic. After that, the mood changed. And you know what? After that, even if you see it in the photographs in the book, earlier we were walking in the groups of 1 or 2. Later on, we were all walking together. We were looking after each other.
Thank you, Sunder.
And that, I think, was a change which happened.
There are several questions, ladies and gentlemen. We will make sure that Sunder does send in, and we will announce the 9 winners. Sorry about the time constraint, because I've been told by the admin that I need to wrap up. And there are a lot of guests from overseas with other engagements after this webinar. But here is one tough question, Sunder. I deliberately want to torture you with this. How do you see young people navigate office politics, organizational politics, and stay true and emphatic and show true leadership? After this, we will request Kamal Oberoi to give us a quick feel, the chef and the trekker, before we wrap up.
Okay, let me answer this question honestly. If you ask the people who work with me, I may have a certain perception about myself. But if you ask the people who work with me, I have never been a political person. Politics will be there. There are people in organization. There is corruption. There are people in organization. But this is a choice I had made at the beginning of my career, that I will have a value called integrity, right? No right way to do a wrong thing. And to my mind, that's, the first thing. And I will be apolitical. I will never be a political person, and I have never been a political person. And sometimes you have to pay a price for that. And that's a choice the youngsters have to make at the beginning of their careers. And then whatever the consequences are, I think you should accept those consequences, right? Whether in terms of career progression, you've not been a political person, it's okay. But at least when I look back, I say to myself that I led an honest life, a life of integrity. And I have always been a non-political person. When I say non-political, it's corporate politics. Otherwise, the politics outside, in the country and all, I can discuss for days. And but this is something which is a choice everybody makes. And I made my choice at the beginning of my career.
Thank you, Sundar. I think I will just read out question 8 to 9, which you can, courtesy the admin, send out a written answer to the constraint of time. There are too many questions. Can you share some anecdotes from your, incidentally, the politics was by Riaz Shah. The question 8 is from Sopti. Can you share some anecdotes from your treks that taught you humility, which you can write to them? Question number 9 is from Kushbu Sharma. Your student from model school, Barakaramba. What is the most difficult part of being a leader, according to you, Sundar? So these two, Kushbu and Inakshi Sopti, my personal apologies because of time constraint. And it's been a lovely evening, and Sundar has been generous, so have all our participants and panelists. So now let me thank everyone once again and sum up by saying we have Kamal Oberoi, an alum of FMS and a member of the Executive Council of FMS Forum, to tell us why he chose to be a chef and what did he actually do on the trek, before I say good night and Shubhratri to all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Parigi. I'm indeed honored and privileged to share my trekking experience with this distinguished audience, and more so in the presence of my mentor, Professor Neelamegham, my tutor, Professor Johri, our current dean, Professor Suneja, and my fellow student Sunder, though I must correct, he was 1 year junior to me. You know, I'm feeling very nostalgic to revisit what transpired in 1977. Today's session has been actually very absorbing, because what has been shared with us are lessons which have been learned based on real life experiences. So I'm going to very quickly, for a positive time, I'm going to just share 2 or 3 anecdotes of the trek and what my lessons in life have been from that, of the incidents out there. The first is take initiatives. Always take initiatives. Life is full of surprises, but never shy away from taking an initiative, because they can be rewarding and sometimes they can even lead to innovations. After all, what is an innovation? Innovation, if you see in the dictionary, the real meaning is act of doing something new. So when our official cook, supposed to be, fell ill, I took the initiative of saying that I will do the cooking. I didn't know cooking at all. What happened was that whatever I could recollect my mom doing in the kitchen, I tried to replicate that on that trek. And lo and behold, I was successful. Now, what was the reward? What happened was that we, to our horror, realized that the guy who was in charge of buying all the provisions bought only one kind of dal. He bought 12 kgs of the same dal, which we were supposed to have for the next 7-8 days. Now you can well imagine, you know, they're all youngsters, 20, 21 years old, hungry on the other. So how I had to think on the spot and take the initiative of experimenting with spices. So what do you say popularly in North India, you use different kind of tadkas to change the flavor and keep the, you know, hunger satisfied of my fellow mates. So the rewards were there for me. Rewards were there because I was made to lead the trek. Sometimes I was exempted from carrying a lot more weight, because, you know, they always wanted me to be, you know, safe and, you know, protective, extra protection toward me, so that I can, you know, I can cook. And more importantly, I was allowed half an hour extra sleep, because I had to go and cook for the next day, which is evening dinner and lunch, and pack them in the boxes. The other thing which led to a lesson to me was that whatever resources you have within you, please utilize them in the most effective manner. Don't think they are waste. So that 11 kg of dal, it didn't turn out to be a waste, because what happened was that in the middle of the trek, we got a day when we had to walk only for 2 or 3 hours. On that day, we were allowed to have a bath, our first and only bath during the trek. Now, it was a very small village. Maybe there were less than 200 or 300 people living out there. And I saw a shop. I went there. There was the only shop in that village. I went there. There was a lady out there, and I asked her, I said, will you barter? Will you exchange my dal with what you have? And she agreed. Now, we could have bought that dal, bought something from her, but I don't know whether, what was our resources. But she happily gave me rajma, and she gave me besan. So that afternoon, I made pakoras of that besan, which you should have seen the thrill and joy on the faces of the students. And that reward, that was the biggest reward, or the other. Now, whether they were cooked well or not, nobody is bothered. But it's a sheer joy of, and the reward, and of, taking the initiative and doing whatever, making best use of the resource you have. And lastly, I would say that before we take any decision or any judgments, make any judgments, or whether it's about brands, about organization, in personal life, always gather as much information as possible and try to understand the background and the culture. And where I learned that was from that while trekking out there, when we were going from one destination to another destination, sometimes we used to meet a passerby out there, and we used to ask, how far is that next destination? The individual used to respond by saying, 2 kos, 4 kos, 8 kos. And we thought it was miles, but no, that wasn't the case. They were measuring by the number of BDs they consumed moving from one destination to another destination. So what was 4 kos was not 4 miles. It was the amount, it was 4 BDs they used to light up before reaching from one destination to another. Now, there are many others, but I think we've run short of time. All I want to say is reiterate what has been said, is that please be fearless in taking initiatives, because failures, don't be fearful of failures, because those are stepping stones to success. Goodbye, good night, have a nice weekend, and we look forward to your joining us for the next WOW event. Thank you.
Kamal. Ladies and gentlemen, my very special thank you to Professor Neelamegham, Lalit Johri, Dean Suneja, and of course Sunder Hemrajani. We have received, gentlemen and ladies, so many questions that the jury has said we will not be able to announce the names in a hurry of the top 9 winners. But I can assure the participants that the 9 winners will be on the forum website by Monday, 1 p.m. in the afternoon, India time. And each of the winners will receive an autographed book signed by none else than Sunder Hemrajani, and will be couriered to their residence. And I think it's been a very, very special evening for us. I hope you all enjoyed the way I and the panelists have enjoyed being here. Once again, a special thank you to the non-FMS community that has assembled today to listen to Sunder in significant numbers, and the FMS community. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, ladies. Good night. Shubhratri.
Thank you, sir.